In this video I'm showing you how to make the paddleball game that I made in class. With any animation, once again, we start out by drawing out a canvas and putting it on the screen, setting its width to be filling the parent, and then we are going to set the height so that there's room at the bottom for buttons. So we're going to set some value there. I'm going to say 300, and now my canvas is as wide as the screen and 300 pixels high. Next thing I want to put a ball on the screen and have it bounce around. So I'm going to grab the pre-made ball, which is the same as an image sprite. It's just the image is a round ball and can't be changed to anything else. And I am going to make its radius larger and change its color to red. If I were to go ahead and run this, it would not move because the speed is set to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and reset the connection and restart it and show you that it's not going anyplace, and pause while we wait here. So now we have the emulator up and we see there's a red ball, but it's not moving. So if I come back and I change the speed to say 1, that's 1 pixel of movement at every interval. The interval is set to 100, so that's 100 milliseconds, therefore a tenth of a second. So every tenth of a second it moves 1 pixel. So if I come back, you can see it resets and the ball is moving to the right at 1 pixel per second. It's moving to the right because the heading is 0. If I were to change that to 180, it would be moving to the left. 0 is to the right, and 180 degrees as you sweep up and down to the left. If I were to change that to 270, that would be going down because I sweep from 0 up to 90, to the left to 180, and then down to 270. So next thing I want to do is I want to have this bounce around, and it's just going incredibly slow for illustration purposes, so I'm going to change its speed to 6. And you can see it's going down at 270, and when it gets to the edge, it stops. And so a ball sprite stops when it gets to the edge unless I put in code to make it bounce. So let's come in and add blocks to make it bounce. I'm going to go to my ball, and I'm going to say when ball1.edge reached, and then one of the blocks in there is bounce. So I'm going to go back to the ball1 and look at the different actions. Call bounce edge. I'm going to drag that out, put it in there, and so it wants the edge that's bouncing with to tell it to go ahead and bounce from that. If I hover over the word edge, I'm going to get the get and set edge. I put it in there, and now the edge I'm referring to is the edge that was called when it bounced. So let's go ahead and take a look. When it gets to an edge, it bounces, and when it gets to another edge, it bounces. Now this would be a rather trivial game of paddleball if it's just going vertically. So we're going to go back to the designer and set its heading to, let's say, 45 degrees. Now it's going at an angle, and hence it'll be coming at us in different ways. So next thing that I need to do is I need to create a paddle. And for the paddle, I'm going to create a square that is 20 pixels high and let's say 64 pixels wide. So I just went out to Paint and created a rectangle that was 20 pixels high and 64 wide. So I need to bring an image sprite onto the screen where I'm going to put my paddle. Then, unlike the ball, which doesn't have any image associated with it, an image sprite has a property called picture. If I click on that and say upload file, I can choose a file from my computer to upload. And so I just put this in my home directory and I called it temp paddle. And now I have my paddle. And so I want to make my paddle move back and forth. If I go ahead and look at this in the emulator, I have my paddle, but if I touch it by clicking here, it does nothing. I want to make it so that when I move my finger while it's touching the paddle left to right, or in the emulator holding down with the left mouse button, the paddle moves with it. So let's go ahead and add the code to make the paddle move. So under image sprite, there's a bunch of different options, such as when I collide with another sprite, when it's dragged, and I want dragged. When I'm dragging this sprite, I want to set its x coordinate to correspond to where my finger currently is. So if I look at, or grab the set, and I'm pulling up set image sprite 1 dot, and it says picture, I want to change its x coordinate. Whoops, that was y. I want to change its x coordinate to be the same as where my finger currently is. So if I hover over the word current x, I can get the get current x. And so now when I go back to the emulator, if I click on here and move, it moves with my finger. So I'm dragging it to the left, it sets the x to the left of my finger. Now it would probably make more sense to have it, the paddle be in the middle of the paddle be where my finger is. So I'm going to come back here, instead of setting the current x, right now current x is on the left hand side. I want to move that paddle a bit further to the left, so I want to subtract from it half the width of the paddle. And an easy way to do that is to just look at the paddle, and I have image sprite 1 dot width, that's how wide that image currently is, and I want to divide that by 2 because I want half the width. So I pull up the math operator, and now I hit 2 and return to get a 2. I could have gone to math and dragged out to the number. So I now have the width divided by 2, and I want to set it to the current x minus that. So again, to the math, pull out the minus operator, and I'm going to say set it to the current x minus that width divided by 2. So now when I come back to my emulator and I click, you'll see that as I drag, it positions that paddle to be in the middle of the paddle to be where my finger currently is. The next thing I need to do is I need to get it so that when the ball hits the paddle, it bounces. So for that, I could go to the ball and say if I'm touching the other sprite, or I could say if I'm the sprite and I'm touching the ball. I'm going to go into the ball, and I'm going to say if the ball has collided with something else, I want to make it bounce. So I know I've collided with another ball or image sprite when this gets called, because that's what this block does. And what I want to do is I want to change its heading from what it currently is to make it reflect. Angle incidence equals angle of reflection. So I'm going to go to the ball 1, say set my heading. So set ball 1 dot, and I'm going to change this to heading to be my current heading times -1, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So I pull that out, set it to my current heading, and I can get my ball 1 heading. Ball 1 dot heading times -1, so I'm going to click in the white space here and type in -1 return to get a number -1, put it in there, and now when I come to my emulator, when it touches the ball, it sets it to -1 of the current heading. Let's go ahead and put the ball in the center, and for a minute let's set its heading to be 270 so that it's going down, and we can see that it actually bounces. So it resets. The emulator starts running again here in a second. I'm going to pause. Okay, I just reset the emulator. It's starting up again, so the ball should be moved to the center. and it's going down, and now it detects as collided, so it sets its heading. It was 270, it's set to negative 270, which is the same as going up, and when it's negative 270, which is the same as 90, and it hits, it's set to negative 90, or if it was negative 270, it's set to positive 270, and it goes up and down. So if I move it out of the way right now, it doesn't bounce off that, but it bounces off the edge. Now let's go back and reset it to be at an angle like we had before. Resets it, and so I have the ball moving around. And so I'm going to move my paddle, and it bounces off like I would expect it to bounce. So that was achieved by saying if I collided with another object, set its heading to be its current heading times -1. But this is if it collides with any object. So really, I want to check to make sure to see it's colliding with my paddle. And to do that, first I'm going to come back and rename these this image sprite to be paddle. So image sprite underscore paddle, so that it's clear what I'm talking about. And as I go back to my blocks, you'll see that they've all been changed. So it's image sprite.paddle. So I want to come in here and check that this other is the image sprite.paddle. So I'm going to drag out a getOther, and I'm going to add an if statement that checks to see if other is equal to image sprite paddle. So I'm going to pull that out for a minute. And I'm going to say if, and under logic you'll find equals, if getOther is equal to, and I want it to check to see if this ball is colliding with the image sprite. So under image sprite paddle, all the way down at the bottom, I believe, yep, you'll see this little image sprite.paddle specifies the object itself. So if this ball is colliding with some other object, and that other object is equal to the paddle, then I change its heading. This will have no effect on what I had before. It's going to work exactly the same way. But if I had multiple image sprites there now, say I had 4 balls, if one of the balls hit another ball, it would have bounced before. Now if it collides specifically with the paddle,